Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Shivim Panim, 70 Faces. As always, as we wait for people to come on, we will share some music. What we're going to share tonight is a very, very well-known, popular, we'll call it a song. It was a poem called Yedid Nefesh. This is traditionally sung right before Kabbalat Shabbat, on Shabbat, in many, maybe even most shuls, and also at third meal. Many, many people sing this at third meal as well. There are 4 stanzas, and the acronym of the first 4 letters of each stanza spells out God's name. The first stanza Yud, and then a Hey, and then a Vav, and then a Hey. And it's one of the most beloved songs because it shows our incredible desire to be close to Hashem. Okay, here we go.
Yedid nefesh av harachamon mishoich avdecha el retzonecha yarutz avdecha kemo Yishtachavel mul hadarecham Yerab lo yedidotecha minofet suf bechol tam
Okay, so singing along with me was Rabbi Shlomo Katz, Aharon Razel, and Yerachmiel Ziegler. So I thank them very much and welcome everyone. I want to mention that this is a pre-recorded class. I'm telling you that so if you're writing chats, don't expect me to answer. I knew that I was going away on Sunday, and I didn't want to miss a class. So I'm pre-recording here. It's Erev Shabbos here in Eretz Yisrael. But we are having a full class, and I thank everyone for coming. So tonight, we're going to do two chapters in 70 Faces, chapter 38 and 39. These are the last two chapters of the section about grammar. So tonight we're going to be looking at when there is a word that is expected to be written in singular, and all of a sudden we see that it's written in plural, or the opposite. A plural word that one would expect is written in the singular. And so this is an obvious kind of signal to the sages that the Torah is trying to tell us something. And so there are many, many commentaries, and this occurs a good amount of times in the Chumash and in the Tanakh. So we'll be going over some of them. So we're going to start with, it's not a word itself, but in a sense, it encapsulates all of the idea of singular and plural. And that is the letter Aleph. The letter Aleph, we know that every letter has a numerical value. So the numerical value of the letter Aleph is 1. And yet, paradoxically, the word Aleph, one of the meanings is Elef, which means 1,000. And in the Torah itself, there isn't a concept of really hundreds of thousands or millions or billions or trillions. There are thousands, and there's 10,000s, and then anything would be a multiple of that. For example, when they want to say the 600,000 cardinal soul roots in Israel, so it's counted 60 10,000s. So here we have in the letter Aleph, excuse me, one of the great mysteries and paradoxes of all of creation is that there is a oneness pervading all of creation. God is one, and thus everything is part of that unity, that oneness. And yet we know that we live in a world of duality and plurality, where we have to, in a sense, work to see the oneness holding everything together. So, even like I said, it's not a particular word in the Tanakh, but the letter Aleph represents this idea of singular and plural, but all in the same letter. And that's actually, Rav Ginsburg calls Aleph the paradox of God and man. Because the letter Aleph, even its shape, represents unity and diversity at the same time. Okay, so the first example of a singular word being in the plural, it's on page 355, where when Cain kills Abel, so the verse says that God comes to Cain and confronts him and says, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth." And in the Torah, so the word blood is written in the plural. which is a bit surprising because here usually we don't talk about someone's bloods in the plural, someone's blood. So the question is, so why is it written in the plural? So in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, so the sages picked up on this, and they said from this we can learn that when, in this example, when someone is killed, then it's not just that one person who's killed, it's everyone that could come from that person. And this is also the statement of the sages that one who kills someone, it's as if they've killed an entire world. So maybe you've seen, I mean, I saw it in this particular instance, but I'm sure this kind of graph shows up in other places, but it was talking about the idea of what happens if someone becomes a Baal Tshuva, someone who wasn't religious and becomes religious. And so they show a graph, let's say it's at a young age, and the person, man or woman, gets married, and they have children, and their children have children, and their children have children. And you can see in this graph, you start out with, let's say, one person, and then it's two, and then it's four, and then all of a sudden it's like 16, and then it's like 64. And like in 3, 4, 5 generations, you have in potential hundreds of people. So that was the point of the sages. And that's why they explained that the word blood here, which would be expected to be written in the singular, is written in the plural. The next example is a very well-known one, is when Yaakov has the dream of the ladder with the angels ascending and descending, and God appears at the top of the ladder. But it says that before he went to sleep, it appears that he was somewhat concerned. He's out in the open, alone, and it says that he put rocks around his head. And Rashi says to protect him from wild animals. So that on the simple level makes sense, that he put some kind of like a protection around his head as he was laying on the ground. Others explain it even not differently, but a little deeper, that the wild animals, in a sense, were his wild emotions at that moment. And so he needed to, in a sense, ground himself. After the dream, so the Torah says that he took the stone and he anointed it. And he said that this is the house of God. This will be the house of God. And this is the gate to heaven. So Rashi and all the commentaries and the sages noticed at first it says he put the stones around his head. And then it said he took the stone. So the Midrash says that, however we understand this, that the stones were arguing with each other, that they didn't want to be just around his head. They wanted the tzaddik, Yaakov, to lay his head on that particular stone. And so, as it were, they were arguing with each other. And it says that God fused the stones together to make one stone, so there would be no argument. And that was the stone that he took afterwards. Others interpret it, this is somewhat prophetic, that he put 12 stones around his head in a prophetic vision of the 12 tribes that would come from him. But they're all unified. The idea is that even though each tribe had its own nature and its own prince and its own flag and its own color, but Am Yisrael is one people. So the fusing of the stone represents the unity of the Jewish people. And again, this is learned from a word that begins being stated in the plural, the stones, and then it becomes the stone. So the next one is also very well known. Maybe the most known of all of this method of understanding the message behind when the singular and plural switch is when we come to, excuse me, the desert of Sinai. So it says that they came and they camped there across from the mountain. Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ahar. And the word for camped is written in the singular. It should have been in the plural. They camped, all of Israel, across from the mountain, yet it's written in the singular. So this is one of the most well-known Rashis, is that when they came to Sinai, they came ke'ish echad b'lev echad. They came as if they were one person with one heart. So this expresses beautifully the idea of Jewish unity, that they were absolutely unified in purpose coming to Mount Sinai. So the question is, what happened that they came to Sinai with such a unity? That's not mentioned in the Torah itself. So there are two possible answers. There's probably more, but two possible answers are, when they came to Sinai, it was just a matter of maybe 6 weeks, actually 5 weeks after they crossed the sea and they saw all of the miracles. And then when they got to the other side and they saw that God had saved them, it says that they all sang together. And there's different versions of how it went. Some explained that Moshe received this song in a prophetic way, and he taught it to the people. He would say one verse and they would repeat it. Others say they all received it at the same time. It was one of those prophetic moments beyond time and space. And in fact, the Midrash says that everyone at the sea saw more than Ezekiel when he had what's called the vision of the chariot, Ma'aseh Merkavah, that everyone there had greater prophecy than even Ezekiel, greater visions. So according to that, they all received this song and they were in a prophetic mode and they all sang together. So here we can understand that after that experience, it was a unifying moment. And once you've had that kind of moment, you can, in a sense, recall it at any time. The other explanation is that right before they came to Mount Sinai, they had fought with Amalek. That's the incident, the story that comes right before they come to Har Sinai. And unfortunately, the Jewish people know all too well how war and tragedy bring Israel together. This is an unfortunate reality, but it is a reality. And in the last 75 years alone, Israel has fought war after war after war. And everyone knows that on the political level, the political scene here, there's a lot of disagreements. Sometimes very, very sharp and bitter, lots of disagreements. But it's also known that when Israel is at war, all of that fades away. And to this day, there's a unity of purpose. And I can mention that even recently, I believe everyone knows that in this last week, there were 3 different terrorist attacks, and 11 people were murdered. And when this happens, everyone feels it. It just, even if one person is killed, but here this was a particularly traumatic week. It was a very, very traumatic week. And you could just feel in the air, everyone knows that everyone is sharing the same kind of feelings. It is a sense of unity. Halavai, we should get it through singing together and not have to be through tragedy. But that's two examples of how they came to Mount Sinai with this sense of unity. K'ish echad b'lev echad. Okay, the next example is on page 359. And this one is a very, very important one because we say it every day, twice a day. And that is when we say the Shema, the passage after the Shema, when it's talking about loving God, it says, B'chal lebavcha u'b'chal nafshecha u'b'chal mo'odecha. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might or means. And so the sages point out that the word, your heart, is written in the plural, where your soul and your means is written in the singular. B'chal levavcha is written in the plural. And so the sages say from this we learn that we should and can serve God with both of our inclinations, the good inclination and the not so good inclination. Yetzer hatov v'yetzer hara. So what does that mean though? What does it mean? Obviously we can understand to serve God with our good inclination, but what does it mean with our evil inclination? So here it doesn't mean that a person is evil. What it means is there are certain inclinations that we have. There's certain drives, certain passions, certain desires that very easily lead us not to good places. But we're told that that same energy behind the desire and passion can be harnessed for the good. And so this is a very, very important message because something like desire or passion, it depends on how we use it. It depends which voices we're listening to and how much self-control we have. But when we can take our more base soul, our animal soul, and harness it and channel it to the good, this is what it means in the plural, b'chal lebavcha, with both of your hearts. And I remember that Reb Shlomo went to Poland. I believe it was 1989. This is even before the fall of the Iron Curtain. And he was invited by the Polish government. And it was a sign of wanting to get beyond the history of Jews in Poland, the Holocaust, many, many different pogroms. There's a long history. And it was a sign from the government that they wanted to reconcile. So Reb Shlomo was invited, and the Polish government set up all of these concerts and visits to different synagogues, factories. It was a whole tour. And so I saw this myself. He was on a bus and he was being interviewed by, I don't remember who was interviewing them, but they said, Rabbi Karlbach, are you aware that there are some people who are in the Jewish world who are questioning your coming to Poland because maybe we need more time before there can be reconciliation. So I'll never forget what Reb Shlomo said. He said, if I had two hearts, I could love with one heart and hate with another heart. He said, but I only have one heart and I choose to love. It was such a classic answer, but it really fits into what we're learning here. With b'chol levavcha written in the plural, that the heart can go to love and it can be pushed or directed to the opposite. Reb Shlomo would say, I only have one heart, and for me, that's going to be a heart of love. By the way, his tour was wildly successful. There's actually a whole video is made. I don't, off the top of my hand, can tell you what link. Maybe if you just go to Google and link Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach's tour of Poland, 1989. There might be a YouTube up that would show. I've seen the whole video of that whole tour. Very amazing, very amazing. Okay, so the last one we're going to do is on page 360. And this is from Purim. This is from the Megillah. And there are two incidences, and they're very, very similar. You'll see on 360, there are two Torahs. So the first one is at the end of the Megillah, after Haman has been defeated, and the Jews have defended themselves. And now it's explaining how Purim is going to be a holiday and how to celebrate it. And so it says, and the Jews took upon themselves what they had taken upon themselves to do, and what Mordechai had written to them. Mordechai had written a letter to everyone in all of the provinces about keeping this holiday, because it was a new holiday. So the way that it's written is V'kibel HaYehudim. And the Jews accepted upon themselves. They took it upon themselves. So again, here we're talking about the whole Jewish people. And it says HaYehudim, which is in the plural. But the word that they took upon themselves is written in the singular. And this is very, very similar to what we just learned, the famous Rashi, that they came to Sinai, Ki'ish echad b'lev echad. There the word camped is written in the singular and not the expected plural. So it's very similar, especially because of the tradition, as we're going to see in the next one. So it says like this. So it says, the Jews ordained and took upon themselves and upon their seed and upon all those who join them that it is not to be revoked, to make these 2 days according to their script and according to their appointed time every year. So here, it's kimu v'kiblu. They established and they accepted. So the sages said, this is talking about much more than just Purim. This is talking about receiving upon themselves the oral Torah. So what does this mean? This is a very, very important concept, that when we came to Mount Sinai, so it says that we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Before we receive the Torah, we will do and we will hear. And that's considered the epitome of free will, is that even before receiving the Torah, we confirmed that we're going to do it, even if we don't understand it. We'll do it, and then we'll understand it. In other words, we trust that God would not give us anything in the Torah that was not for our good. So we accepted it, in a sense, sight unseen. But then we have the teaching from the sages, because it says that Moshe brought them to the bottom of the mountain. In other words, there's a mountain and everyone was standing around it at the base of the mountain. The sages come up with an amazing drush, an amazing symbolic explanation, is that God took the mountain and held it over their heads and said, if you receive the Torah today, good. And if not, this will be your burial place. So everyone asks, how did the sages come up with such an explanation of that, simply that they stood at the base of the mountain? So what they were trying to give over is an idea that as much as we receive the Torah from free will, there's a certain place that it was more destiny. It was more than we accepted with free will. If we go all the way back to the patriarchs and the matriarchs, there was a certain destiny that was put upon the Jewish people. And part of that was to receive the Torah. So the sages wanted us to know that, yes, we received it from free will, but there's a place that it's beyond free will, that it's part of a much bigger picture of divine providence and the task and the mission of the Jewish people. So because of that, because there was this idea that God was holding the mountain over our heads, so the sages said, we didn't really receive it 100%. Some say we received the written Torah, but we had not totally received the oral Torah. But at Purim, that's what it means that we established and we accepted upon ourselves, not just Purim, but because Purim was a new holiday and it was being established by the sages. So unless we accepted the oral Torah, how could we inaugurate a new holiday, initiate something brand new? So that meant the idea of accepting the oral Torah. So there, what's interesting, again, on the word that they received upon them, the kiblu, it's written in the singular, but we read it in the plural, but it's different because this is what's called the kri and kativ that we learned about in many chapters ago, where a word will be written one way, but we have an oral tradition that we read it differently. Here it's written in the singular, excuse me, but we read it in the plural. So here's two examples from the Megillah, really saying the same thing about the unity. The first one was about the unity, v'kibel, written in the singular, but it's really understood that it's talking about all of Am Yisrael. And the second one, it's actually written in the singular, and we read it in the plural. In the first one, we don't read it in the plural. It's just understood that that's the teaching behind it. Okay, so that was chapter 38. And now we're going to do chapter 39. This is the last chapter on grammar. And the next time we're going to be starting juxtaposition, a big section and very, very fascinating. So now we're going to deal with what's called first, second, and third person. Because we know in grammar that either words or sentences are given over in the first person, the second person, or the third person, I, you, or they. So just like every other method, if there is an expectation that a word would be in the first person, but it's said in the second person or the third person, then again, we know This is an alert that there's something hidden here. There's some secret, some deeper message. So the first one we're going to do is on page 362. And this is when Abraham received the three guests. He was actually in the middle of we'll call it a vision, a visitation from God. And then he sees that these three strangers are coming, and because Avram's whole mission in life is to welcome strangers and to teach them about one God, Abraham respectfully says to God, "It looks like I have some guests. Please pardon me. I have to take care of my guests." And so he brings them in. He didn't know at that time that they were angels. He just thought they were actually pagans. But Avram was open to everyone and wanted to teach everyone. So he brings them in and he says, "I will take a morsel of bread that you may satisfy your heart." So the way it's written grammatically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. In other words, he's offering them bread. So he should have said, "I am giving you a morsel of bread that you may satisfy your heart." But it says, "I will take a morsel of bread." So we actually learn a halakha from this, that if a host has people at the table, that it should be the host that says the blessing on the bread and distributes it to the guests. So the sages, from this anomaly in the grammar between first person and third person, actually second person, learn a halakha from this, that Avram was saying, "I will take a morsel of bread because I'm going to make a blessing on it and I'm going to give it to you." So here we see that there's actually a Jewish law that is connected to the difference, the expectation of the grammatical structure of the sentence. The next example is we mentioned already, the Song of the Sea. So near the end of the song, so it says, we're speaking to God, "You will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance." Here it's talking about the people understood from the moment that they left Egypt that they were going to Israel. And so here at the end of the song, where the people said to God, "You will bring them into the land and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance," hinting to the temple. And so the Talmud in Bava Batra point out, why didn't they say, "You will bring us in"? They were on their way to Israel. Why would they say "You will bring them in"? And so the Talmud answers that this was a prophetic statement, that because we ended up 40 years in the desert, and all of the men between 20 and 60 had passed away. And so the Talmud said a very, very interesting thing, a very important thing, is that they were prophesying without even knowing the real implication of what their words were saying. So this is an idea that is repeated many times, and many times Rashi will bring an explanation where someone will say or do something, and it turns out that it's prophetic. But the question is, do they understand the prophetic nature of what they're saying? So there are many, many examples. I'm just going to bring just a few. So when there's a famine in Israel, and this is after Joseph has been sold, and we know in the Torah that Yosef ended up 12 years in jail there, and then he ended up being the second in charge of all of Egypt. But of course, Yaakov and his sons didn't know this. And so then the famine that Yosef had predicted affected Israel as well, much of the world. And Yaakov says, I see there's shever b'Mitzrayim. This is a good Torah before Pesach. I see, now the word shever, what he meant, like many words in Hebrew, a word can have many diverse meanings. So shever means, in this sense, I see there's food. I see there's grain. I see there's produce. So, or for example, I remember in Israel, this is going way back, the first, what we would call a department store in America, like the first one opened up in Israel was called Mashbir. Because in the Torah, Yosef is called the Mashbir. He's the one providing food for the whole world. So Yaakov says, I see there's shever b'Mitzrayim, and he sends his sons down to get grain. But the word shever also means brokenness, like shvirat hakelim, like the breaking of the vessels. And so in a sense, Yaakov was saying something prophetically, that he sees there's a great breaking in Israel. In other words, it's going to lead to slavery. Our going down to Egypt to get grain ultimately is going to lead us down to living in Egypt and then being enslaved. But the whole question is, did Yaakov understand what he was saying? It's a big question. Another example is also from Yaakov. When he says to them, not only does he say, I see that there's grain, he says, redu, go down. And Rashi, this is one of the, it's certainly not the only time, but it's fairly rare in Rashi that he brings a gematria. And he says, redu equals 210, that it was a prophetic statement on Rashi's part that we ended up in Egypt for 210 years. So here it seems that he didn't know, but prophecy was coming through him. So actually, there are many, many other examples of this idea where certain things are said in the Torah and they have prophetic meaning, but it's not clear whether the person saying it understood the full implication. It's a fascinating subject in of itself. Now, the next one is on page 365. And this is something we've actually dealt with already. And that was in the section of Kri and Ketiv. We just mentioned it a few minutes ago, that a word will be written a certain way in the Torah, but we have a tradition to read it differently. That's what's called this idea of it's written one way but it's actually said a different way. So we actually learned the same thing, but here it's about first person, second person, and third person. So this is when Naomi, Ruth, who is the daughter-in-law of Naomi, comes back with Naomi after a famine, and she converts, and they don't have a penny to their name. And so Ruth is out in the field, and she meets, it's actually a relative, Boaz. And when she comes back and says to Naomi that I was in the field of Boaz, so she was very excited because she understood that there could be a Levirate marriage between Boaz and Ruth. And it would, in a sense, it would like save them. not just financially, but there's also a prophecy here, because what comes from the union of Boaz and Ruth leads to King David. So she tells Ruth to go down to the threshing floor, that Boaz will be there, to go at like midnight. And the way she says it is she's giving Ruth instructions. And she's saying, and you shall bathe and anoint yourself and put on your clothes and go down. And then it continues, and you shall come and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. So in the way that it's written is it's written in the first person. We read it as if Naomi is saying in the language of you. You should do this, you should do that. But it's written, I will do this and I will do that. So what we learn from this, and this kind of runs through the whole book of Ruth, is how much Ruth, in a sense, gave herself over to her mother-in-law, and in a sense became not just her messenger, but Naomi was acting through her. And here we see it between the first and second tenses. It's written in the second tense, but it's written in the first, as if Naomi is doing these things. And then later, we see how this plays itself out, because Ruth does marry Boaz, and they have a child. And as soon as we hear that Ruth becomes pregnant, like her name doesn't appear anymore. And so it says like this, that after the baby is born, it says, and Naomi took the child and placed him on her bosom, and she became his nurse. It's like, whoa, Naomi is somewhat elderly at this point. And yet it's given over as if it's her child and she's nursing it. In fact, the people say a son has been born to Naomi. And they called his name Oved. He is the father of Yishai, the father of David. So here we see that Ruth is so sublimated, has such humbleness and love of her mother-in-law. It's as if Naomi is living through her. So, like I said, we learned this before, but in a slightly different aspect of the Kri and the Ketiv, the way it's read and the way it's written. But here we're learning it between first and second person. Now, probably the most important statement that takes the idea of first, second, and third tenses and includes them is the very, very important teaching from Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Yehuda Nasi, who compiled the Mishnah. And he said, make it so that his will shall be your will, so that he should make your will to be as his will. Nullify your will before his will, so that he should nullify the will of others before your will. So here, there's not like an expected change, but here we see this inter-inclusion between making your will his will, so that he can make his will your will. And so here we see in a sense, the merger of second and third tenses. And this just reminds me of a famous statement by the Kotzker Rebbe. He said it in Yiddish. I'll say it in English. And he said like this, he said, if I am I, because you are you, I am not I, and you are not you. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am I, and you are you. I hope everyone was able to follow that. But what it means is, if I act and I think and I feel because of what you might think of me and what you say and what you do, then I am not I, because my I is totally a reflection or influenced by you. And the same thing, if you are the way you are because the way I might treat you or think of you or talk to you, then you're not you and I'm not I. Only when I am I and you are you, everything works out. So that's like a famous statement about these tenses. And connected to this is a very, very famous Hasidic Rabbi, Rabbi Zusha. Rabbi Zusha was the brother of Rabbi Elimelech, who was the Rebbe of the Seer of Lublin, who had many, 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 many Hasidic Rebbes came from being students of the Seer of Lublin. And Rabbi Zusha was a very, very unique figure in Hasidic lore, many stories about him. But it was known that he never talked in the first person. He would always say, Zusha is hungry. Zusha would like to talk to you. Zusha needs to go somewhere. He never would use the word I, because the word I, he felt, has been so misused, and there's so much ego attached to it that he never used it. He always talked as if he's talking about someone else. Zusha needs this or that, and there are many, many stories about this that we don't have time, but you probably can Google famous stories about Reb Zusha. And the last one is a very, very important one. A very, very important one is because it's contained in how we make blessings. So there's two types of blessings. One, we'll call it the shorter blessing, is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam, and then whatever your blessing. Blessed are you, O God, King of the universe. And here we're addressing God as you. In other words, it's every time we make a blessing, ideally, we should really feel that we're addressing the Creator, that we're talking directly to God. Blessed are you. But in longer blessings where we continue, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav, that who has made us holy in his commandments. So now we would expect, if we started the blessing with you, we would expect that you have made us holy in your commandments. But it says in his commandments. So what we learned from this, because obviously when the sages composed the blessings, they understood that there was a grammatical variance happening here between second tense and third tense. So why did they do it? And one of the reasons, and I'm sure there are many reasons, but let's say the main reason is it's teaching us, in a sense, two different ways to relate to God. There's a direct relationship, you, that's how we start a blessing. And I'd say the vast majority of blessings are the shorter. It is you. But the longer blessings, which are used on many mitzvahs, adopts the idea, his commandments, is to teach us also that, in a sense, there's a limit to the type of familiar relationship that we should have with God. In other words, we're encouraged to have that relationship, but there's a counterbalance of a more what's called yira, of having a healthy respect and awe of God that puts a bit of a distance. And what this reminds me is between parents and children. So most parents, at least in the last generation or two, it wasn't this true in much of history. In much of history, the parent is the authority. Not that there's not love there, but in almost every culture, the relationship between children and parents was one of awe, sometimes fear, and respect. Now, there could be a lot of love there also. In the last generation or two, there's been a tremendous emphasis on being your children's best friends, which is a very good thing. It's a beautiful thing. But up to a point, there's a certain point where if the relationship between parent and child becomes too much like friends, something very important is lost. Something very important is lost, both for child and parent. So I think that is what is being taught here, that in the same blessing, we begin with you, and then we say in his mitzvah, in a sense, to balance two types of relation. They both are love, and they can both be with awe, but there's a slight difference, and this points it out to us. So we got through 2 chapters today. For those people who came on late, I try to point out in the beginning that this was a pre-recorded class. I knew I wouldn't be at home during the usual Sunday hours, and so I pre-recorded it. So I hope a lot of people didn't write long chats. I try to let everyone know towards the beginning. I want to end with a blessing. God willing, we will be learning next week as well. I'll already say that during Pesach, we will not be learning. Okay, so we should end with a blessing that, yes, Pesach is coming. Rosh Chodesh is, again, I'm recording on Friday, so it's this Shabbos. And it's time for renewal, rejuvenation, new energy, new perspectives. And I bless everyone when we take out our new kelim, our Pesach vessels, that we understand that those vessels need to be new so we can contain a new energy. Thank you, everyone, for coming.